Father, we're very grateful for how much you provide for us. We thank you for Micah and the effort he puts out for us. We thank you for how you love us from you and from your people. We thank you also that you feed us through your word. In Jesus, we pray. Amen. Amen. Today is our 9th time together. We have a total of 12. We've been in a series of the righteousness of God in the Old Testament, really kind of the story of the Old Testament. It's a chance for us to get familiarized with the Old Testament, the big issues, the big storyline, the major themes. Okay, and I have the big picture means seeing Bible from like 10,000 feet, so you can see patterns that are going on, and in so doing, you just gonna miss a lot of little things. That's just the reality of seeing things in the big picture. We've been looking at this for quite a while now, and a quick review, the Bible in 5 acts. Act 1, God creates heaven and earth and appoints human vice-regents to rule the earth on his behalf. That's pretty much Genesis 1, 2, Act 1. Genesis 3, the human vice-regents rebel against their liege, leading to chaos and corruption on earth. That's Genesis 3 through 11. Act 3, God calls into existence the kingdom of Israel as his tool to end rebellion and restore his rule on earth. The kingdom rejoins the rebellion. That's the rest of the Old Testament, pretty much, starting from Genesis chapter 12 all the way to the end of the Old Testament. And then Act 4, we have a brand new act from God, which is in continuity with the previous act. God sends his son as the embodiment of faithful Israel and calls the church into existence as his tool to end rebellion and restore his rule on earth. Act 5, God does restore his rule on earth and renews all creation. We are living in Act 4. So this is the by putting it this way, you can see, first of all, the cosmic nature of the Bible is dealing with nothing less than the restoration of God's rule over heaven and earth, over the earth. Second, you can tell the kind of the forward-looking nature of the Old Testament. The Old Testament ends here, which means it's really a story begging for an ending. And plenty of people have ventured to write that ending. Not just the New Testament authors. Other people have as well. But you're probably not familiar with those texts. Josephus, Antiquities, Jewish Wars are in some sense ways of writing that story.
Would modern Judaism be a way of...
And that would be another way. Modern Judaism is another way of writing the ending to that story. They're all writing endings to the story because the story is just, there's something wrong with the story. If it ends there, it sucks. Okay, it's just really poorly done. So New Testament is one way to write in the story. The Mishnah, the Mishnah and the Talmud are another ways of writing the ending story. The Antiquities, the Jewish Wars. There's different ways to try to write the ending. Okay. We actually, in the last first 8 sessions, have finished the entire primary history. And what I mean by primary history, I mean Genesis through 2 Kings as one continuous narrative, being edited by somebody in exile in Babylon. Okay, so we're going to drop from there. Okay, drop Ruth out. Okay, Ruth is not part of this. Genesis all the way through to 2 Kings, one continuous story. And so here's kind of a brief summary of the things that are in primary history. Once again, you're trying to break the story down into now. So we're doing 5 acts now. We're kind of diving in a little bit. We can see a little bit more detail. Okay, when we do this, but we should be able to maintain the larger structure. God creates, establishes rule over all creation. God creates human beings, establishes them as rulers over the earth. That's Act 1. We have 2 sentences now for it. The human rulers rebel, leading all of earth into a state of corruption, sin, and death. The human rulers are exiled from intimacy with God, and their relationship with each other is strained. The human society increases in sin and corruption under the rule of Satan. We find out in the New Testament. It's kind of a little preview. And then that's Genesis 11. God chooses Abraham as his covenant partner and promises to establish a kingdom through him as the means to reestablish his rule on earth. Okay? So here you have the problem. The solution is a kingdom. God's into kingdom building, or what we call nation building today, maybe. And he is going to reestablish his rule on earth through this kingdom. To establish his kingdom, God engenders a people, the descendants of Abraham, sustaining them, protecting them, and rescuing them from slavery in Egypt. To establish his kingdom, God reveals to his people a constitution, a set of laws that regulates their society in order to demonstrate God's character and his values. To establish his kingdom, God gives his people the land of Canaan, a place where they can live as example to the nations. And then the people rebel against this God, rejecting his rule, his laws, and his values. To sustain this kingdom, God established the house of David as a dynastic line that will rule Israel forever, providing spiritual leadership. The God-appointed kings lead their people in rebellion against God. The people are exiled, the kingdom devastated, the temple representing God's presence is destroyed. That's the story, a brief summary of primary history, in which we have been going over for about 8 sessions. Any questions on this? On the story? You get the story arc, the thrust, the major themes. No questions. Last time, we're still reviewing, last time we came up with another way of summarizing. I'm trying to give you different ways to grab hold of this whole story arc, because the story arc is important. So if you can kind of get it, you get a short version of it in your head, that's cool. Okay. So this is another way of grabbing the big points. God creates a people, he gives them his law, he provides them with a land, he gifts them with kingship, the people rebel, and God sends them to exile. That's like another short version of this. Okay? Now the short version of this, and I like this because you can then just use Garden of Eden story as a way to remember. The story of Israel is really a longer version of the story of the Garden of Eden. Okay? God creates Adam and Eve, gives them command, do not eat that fruit, that tree. Gives them the eat garden and lets them rule. And then they rebel and they're kicked out. And that's Israel's story in a microcosm. Okay. And that idea right there, those two story arcs, okay, that we're really having created a story of Adam and Eve really representing humanity, and the story of Israel as being a kind of a shrunken in terms of one people, but really having the same fate as of all of humanity. There's some theological import there. And then when you get to New Testament, I think when we read through Mark, we have a repeating of the story, right? Another new person comes along and is starting a new nation and is eventually, killed and exiled in some ways. And then there's kind of a resurrection. So repeating stories in the Bible, something to think about. Okay. The unanswered questions from primary history. What is God going to do about the rebellion of the world? Okay. He did something. He called Abraham. That didn't quite work out. So now what? What is God going to do about Israel's exile? Will God rebuild the kingdom of Israel? So the problem becomes twofold. Previously it was just one set of problems. The world. Now it's, the tools you sent to solve the problem, they're now exiled. It's like the person you sent to rescue the princess, the knight that you sent to rescue the princess, the knight is now imprisoned. So are you going to rescue the knight as well? Are you still going to use that knight somehow to rescue the princess? Because you promised that you would. Okay, so how's that all going to work? So the problem actually, the Israel story has actually complicated the entire storyline of a problem solution, because the solution is actually part of the problem, become part of the problem. And how will you be faithful to the original solution? How will the future Israel kingdom be different? How will the people keep covenant? Who will be the king? How will the king be different? These are all kind of the questions that are just kind of floating around. And as you people in the New Testament, you're thinking, wow, the New Testament authors are swirling. Their writing are just swimming around with these questions. They're trying to answer these questions. Okay, and they see that Jesus' story is the way, the solution to all of this. Okay, so when you read the New Testament, you go, oh, that's what they're doing. Another way of looking at this are the major themes that we've been touching on. And once again, these are ideas that you will see running around the New Testament. Okay? The New Testament authors are infused with the themes of the Old Testament. And so you have creation, recreation ideas. You have image of God and kingship. Okay? Rebellion. A missional covenant. What I mean by that is it's a covenant that's more than just about a relationship with you and God, but it's a relationship that points to a job, a responsibility, a calling to do something. So it's a covenant with a mission. Faith, prayer, self-sacrifice shows up here. Salvation from slavery, cultus, temple, and the Torah, they're all showing up. Land, idolatry, exile, and I want to point out God's personhood, because we've been talking about that quite a bit. So these are kind of the major things that we have been talking about that's in the story of the primary history. That you can, when I say creation and recreation, you go, oh, I know what you're talking about. When I say, salvation from slavery, boom, stories pop out, right? So there's Old Testament stories that are playing with these themes, and then these themes are then reinterpreted, re-signified in the New Testament. Okay, and so you start thinking, okay, creation, recreation, where is that? Born anew. Wait a minute. The idea of being born from above idea. It's like new life, new creation. In Christ is the new creation. Like, wait, So people are playing with creation ideas in the New Testament, right? Kingship, Messiah. Okay, that kind of just right there, right? Rebellion is sin. The Great Commission is part of the new covenant. You are to go into all the world. That covenant with a missional aspect to it, right? So all of these things you just kind of think about a little longer. You go, okay, I can see what the New Testament authors are doing. They are living and swimming in this water, and what they're writing, what comes out with these echoes all over the place. Okay. Any questions? Okay. So what I'm trying to do is I want to get you guys into an Old Testament story mindset where you're thinking everything in terms of Old Testament storyline, and then when you read the New Testament, you go, oh, well, yeah, that's what they're doing. And that's kind of the connections they're drawing, the kind of the problems they're faced with, and what they're trying to solve, okay? Because they are trying to solve problems. Yes.
Do you think the pre-exilic and exilic questions are the same?
Well, no, they're not.
Okay.
Right, but we haven't got to the exilic stuff. This is primary history. Primary history is right at exile. We haven't got to
So
the
on
end
your
of the
previous
exilic
slide,
stuff.
when you said these are the unanswered questions, who's
Yeah.
asking those questions?
Okay. These questions?
Yes.
These are the questions I would think provoked by the storyline of primary history.
So are people?
So I would say people in Babylon are asking these questions. And people after return from the exile are still asking these questions.
That's my question. Whether
Yeah.
whether that's the.
This continues. The reason, of course, is that return from exile is far from universal. Right? I mean, the Second Temple literature is clear. Well, not clear. I would say a lot of Second Temple literature, what I mean is by Second Temple literature, I mean
Yeah.
written during the temple that's been rebuilt in the Ezra Nehemiah period. During that period and onward, and I would say Second Temple period extends all the way to 70 AD. Okay, so that's when the destruction of the Second Temple period. During that time, a lot of Jewish writing strongly conveys something that's really obvious, I think, to us, if you think about it, which is that the exile isn't much of an exile. I mean, the return from exile wasn't much of a return. It just didn't work. It wasn't anything like the prophet said.
So they downplayed everything?
They were saying that a new return needs to happen. That this return wasn't the real one, because there was nothing like what the prophets offered, what the prophets promised. The prophets promised awesome return, the day of Yahweh, in which God comes in and knocks out the Gentiles, and what we have is the exaltation of Mount Zion as the highest mountain in the world, and people stream to Jerusalem and to learn their Torah. Instructions come from Jerusalem to all the world. It's a glorified Jerusalem, exalted over the other nations. That's the vision. So when when Zerubbabel and that crowd left Babylon and they carried back with them some of the temple stuff and they rebuilt the temple, they thought, well, this is going to happen. Zerubbabel was in the line of David. He was expecting a restoration of a Davidic dynasty. Never happened. That David is supposed to be king again. Never happened. The temple is supposed to be awesome. When it got rebuilt, some of the older guys who saw the original temple started crying. Okay, they're like, I think the idea is this really sucks compared to what I remember. Okay, so some of the older guys who were children when they were exiled came back like, we built for this. We came all the way back for this, and there was a massive disillusionment. You can see it if you read Zechariah, if you read Ezra and Nehemiah. They were very disillusioned by this return, and the fact that most Jews didn't come back. Okay, should tell you something. Yeah, the diaspora that's been out there ever since the exile. The Babylon, they were gathering in Egypt, they were gathering in Europe, they were gathering all different places. They were spread out. Most of them, the Levitical, the priesthood came back and the kingly line came back. Because they all have something to gain. Everybody else is like, it's a podunk area, what are we going back there for? Papping Babylon. Okay.
It's sort of ironic that Jesus' time they were very observant. It's like they celebrated the Passover and the other feasts.
Yeah.
So it's like I guess the conclusion would have been okay, we followed the law.
Yeah.
Therefore something should happen.
Right. Exactly. So that's exactly the point. Which was if you have the return, okay, if you have the return and nothing happens, like nothing like you expect happened. The Davidic, I mean, Zerubbabel never became the king. The Davidic line never was established. What do you think? Okay. Did we screw up again? right? We were kicked out previously because of our unfaithfulness. Did we screw up again? What do we do now? Oh, I think our problem is we're too much mixing with Gentiles. So let's actually we're going to talk about this next time. I'm giving a little preview about what we're talking about next time. Let's divorce all our Gentile wives.
There's after the exile.
This is after the exile. So they start doing all these things to accentuate their Torah observance, what we call hyper-Torahism. Right? Just take the Torah, observe it harder, more legalistically, more intensely, as a way of manipulating, well, not manipulating, but ways of demonstrating our faithfulness to God and get God to finally accomplish the return. Right? So that mentality is very understandable, and that just culminates by the time of Jesus into these Pharisees. We're going, okay, we got all the rules for everything. Okay? Because we want God to come back, and Jesus, you are a major problem because you're breaking the rules. Okay? So for Jesus was very unacceptable to the Pharisees because he was not following their program of hyper-Torah observance.
Maybe a little bit on the tangent, but after the second temple that was destroyed,
Yeah.
what did they think then? Because they were super rude.
Right, so we're jumping way ahead now. We're talking about after 70 AD. So Jesus died. Hyper-Torah observance eventually led to what you call within the Pharisaism. Now there's there's Hillel and then there's the other guy. There's two major rabbis, and I'm sorry? Gamaliel, yes, there we go. They're representing two different strands of Pharisaism, which today we can loosely term as trust God and let go and let God versus trust God and get going. Okay? One is more proactive than the other. They both want a restoration of Israel, but one is going to say, you know what? It's time to take some actions. So from the 70 AD, the Pharisees were very actively involved in attempting to overthrow the Romans in the rebellion of the 70 AD. Okay? That was a disaster. Romans came in and wiped out the temple. The 125, the Saman Bar-Chokbah, the son of the stars, he led a revolution, and one of the Pharisee rabbi declared him the Messiah. They said, "This is the man." So they got their warrior Messiah. They were waiting and waiting. They got him. Then they challenged the Romans. The Romans wiped them out again. This time, declared Jerusalem to be a Gentile city, which means they drove all Jews out of Jerusalem. And Jews did not come back to Jerusalem in mass numbers again until the 19th century.
I think you were allowed to come back every year on the celebration of the destruction of the temple.
Then they're gone, right? I mean, it's kind of they got sick of it. The Romans got sick of this. It's like, come on, you guys, okay? And of course, you know that path is a major path for access to the granary in Egypt. So the river delta it's Roman Empire's granary, and that food traveled to Rome through that path right there, and it just ticked them off. They finally had it with us. So they made it a non-Jewish city. And so the storyline. So you're absolutely right. Even by 90, a Council of Jamnia was already making changes about what Judaism means. But the movement in the Talmud, in the Mishnah of the Talmud, is a movement much more toward Torah reading, a movement away from Davidic kingship, from land, and from temple observance, more to private acts of good work and Torah reading. So Torah, study of Torah, becomes the highest of all good. So you notice then what happens is the aspiration of the people is no longer national. It's now individual and very much focused on studies. So modern Judaism is really is really birthed after 70 AD. When you lost all hope of restoring the Davidic line and owning the land and creating a people of Israel, a kingdom of Israel, and that's modern Judaism. So today's current Israel is birthed not out of Judaism, but out of a very secular Zionism that has roots in communist thinking. Very much have a people. Let's have a safe place for the Jews idea. It was not birthed out of let's get a Davidic kingdom again. So it comes out of a very different place. Even though, of course, things have changed now. Having that land and having the nation of Israel has drastically altered Orthodox Jewish thinking. But previously, before the return, Orthodox Jews, some of the prominent rabbis refused to go back. They're saying this is not of God. So, yeah, so very interesting. The 19th century, 20th century's history of modern Judaism.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So I hear it said and hear people ask whether there are any Jews today who are looking for the Messiah?
You mean who are not Christians?
Yes.
Oh, I would think there would be by now. I think there've always were some. I'm talking about majority, but this is harder to talk about now. I'm sure there are some, but I think there are some. The one in New York, especially, there's still Messianic Jews, rabbis who are waiting for the Messiah.
Yeah.
For the restoration.
But that probably isn't, and maybe never was, a majority.
Like I said, there's a strong turn away from that after the destruction of the temples.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay.
They just gave up. Messiah's not coming.
It's a re-understanding of your text.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, sorry, we already went off the rail early today. Okay, so just kind of a review again of where we've been. Today we're dealing with ritual and we're moving out of primary history and we're going to deal with prophets and the other books. Today we're dealing with ritual and obedience. We're providing some themes that primary history really doesn't touch on. Primary history can't touch on everything, so we're going to try to supplement what's not in the primary history. Today we're dealing with ritual obedience. Basically, where Israel went off the rail, aside from idol worship. Next time we're talking about the loss of mission. Remember the missional covenant idea. And we're talking about how Israel became ethnocentrically focused. And their relationship with pagan nations become very strained. After that, we're going to talk about the promise of renewal. What exactly is the hope that the prophets are offering? Okay. And then finally, we're going to get into understanding of suffering as our final meeting together. Because the Old Testament really has a wonderful transition that really previews the Christ suffering. Okay, so we will be doing that, and that will end our discussions on the Old Testament. Okay, today, the problem of social injustice in ancient Israel. We've dealt with primary history. Chronicle, Ezra, and Nehemiah we'll touch on next time. We're going to look at prophetic literature a little bit today, mostly today, where we'll touch on Psalms, some wisdom lit, and maybe Ruth even. We're going to try to touch on a little bit of everything. Okay, just kind of where it goes. Prophets. Today we're looking at prophets. In the prophetic literature, we have these four major books. Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, the book of the 12. Daniel is not part of this. What I mean by this is we have certain structure in the Hebrew Bible and prophetic literature. These fits into it much better than Daniel does. And the last one is actually 12 small books jammed into one, but they've always been in one book, what we call the minor prophets. So Amos, Hosea, Jonah, they're all of them kind of in one scroll. Okay, they're kind of the book of the 12. They're minor prophets because we don't like them. No, just kidding. It's not like we don't like them. They're just short. So the major prophets are long, minor prophets are short. And if you like shorter writing, you should love the book of the 12. So it's really just kind of length related. Any questions on this? Yes?
Did it have to do with the 12 tribes of Israel?
I don't think so. But maybe. I mean, that's a good question. There's no direct correlation between any of the prophets to particular tribes. Okay, none of that. Nobody's ever detected that. But why is it that they only chose 12 prophets to collect them together? Maybe there's something going on there. Right? Numbers are important. Right? Numbers are symbolic. 11, book of 11 doesn't sound as good. So I think there's something going on there. Okay. A quick introduction on who are the prophets. A prophet is divinely appointed spokesperson for God. This is an important definition. When we talk about prophecy or prophets, we tend to think of future predictions. Now we think about assisting. Assisting? Wait, not assisting. What is it? Celesting? Wait.
Soliciting?
Something kind of prophecy. Isn't it? You've heard of these?
Celestine
prophecy. Yeah, we tend to think about people making predictions that happens that happens in the future. That is not the definition of prophet or prophecy in the Bible. Because just kind of lay that out right here. A prophet is a divinely appointed spokesperson for God. A prophet speaks for God. Whatever the person God wants to say, that is now prophecy. Okay, So I'll give you an example how this is used. Exodus 4, Moses said, "Pardon your servant, Lord, please send somebody else." And then Yahweh's anger burned against Moses, and he said, "What about your brother, Aaron the Levite? I know he can speak well. He's already on his way to meet you, and he will be glad to see you. And you shall speak to him and put words in his mouth. I will help both of you speak and will teach you what to do. He will speak to the people for you, and it will be as if he were your mouth and as if you were God to him." Okay, so the idea is that Moses is going to be like God, and Aaron is going to be your mouth, your spokesperson, mouthpiece. And then 7:1, then Yahweh said to Moses, we'll jump ahead a little bit, "See, I have made you like God to Pharaoh, and your brother Aaron will be your prophet." Right? So the relationship is one of God-prophet relationship between Moses and Aaron. And this in here, we're not dealing with any kind of future prediction. We're just dealing with communications officer, a spokesperson. That's all we're dealing with here. Okay, that's what prophet is. Now, can a prophet talk about the future? Yes. Okay, so we're not precluding predictions, but that is not the definition of prophecy. Does that help? Okay, so we're going to do a definitional thing here. Who are the prophets? We have some amateur prophets. Ooh, could you close that curtain for me? Help me close it up. Again, you could pull on the strings behind
To the
it.
right.
To the right, yeah, there's some strings there. I should have done that earlier. It was not as bright earlier. There are prophets who are not professional prophets. They're actually professional prophets. Maybe that's a shocking thing. Let's begin with the amateur one, the Amos. The Amos had said to Amos, "Get out, you seer. Go back to the land of Judah." So, okay, so they're in Israel, the northern kingdom. Okay, there's northern southern kingdom, and Amos obviously is from the south. He's from Judah. He's gone to the north, and Amaziah said, "Get out, you seer. Go back to the land of Judah. Earn your bread there and do your prophesying there." Okay, so go there and do your work as a prophet there. Prophet is a profession. Okay, earn your bread. You can be a prophet and make money that way. Okay, yes, it is kind of weird. Like, oh, I'm a professional prophet. Okay, don't prophesy anymore at Bethel because this is the king's sanctuary and the temple of the kingdom. Basically, look, this is where we got the northern. We have our own prophets here. You're from the south. Go back to your own place. Now, Amos is a little upset about that. He says, no, I was neither a prophet nor the son of a prophet. Strangely enough, prophet can be passed on from generations. There's the idea that my father's a prophet, I'm a prophet. Your father's a fisherman, you're a fisherman, you know? So my father's a prophet. So I was not a prophet nor the son of a prophet, but I was a shepherd. And I also took care of sycamore fig trees. But Yahweh took me from tending the flocks and said to me, "Go prophesy to my people Israel." So you have a person who's pulled out of an existing vocation and boom, became a prophet. Amos, in some ways, is the kind of prophet that we imagine prophets should be like. Right? This is kind of our prototype, or maybe not prototype, archetype of what a prophet is. Somebody doing something gets called by God to go and be a prophet. Okay? But he is in the minority. Okay? Amos is rare. Most prophets aren't like this. So we have professional prophets, and you have a reference to them in Isaiah 3. "See now, the Lord, the Yahweh Almighty, is about to take from Jerusalem and Judah both supply and support, all supplies of food and supplies of water, the hero and the warrior, the judge and the prophet, the diviner and the elder." So we have these categories of leaders in a society, and the prophet is one of them. Okay, so we kind of have these. We just have prophets. How do they work? How are they supported? I think you have prophets that are in certain cities and places where people go and ask questions, looking for help with lost donkeys, as Saul did. But we also have, I think that the most number you'll probably find relates to the royal court. The king employs prophets. Lots of them. Okay, which makes sense. Because you want to know what God is up to. So you want to find out what he says. So here's one. Before David got up the next morning, the word of Yahweh come to Gad the prophet, David's seer. He's kind of like David's personal prophet. Okay. Who do you work? I'm David's prophet. I work for David, to speak to him for God. Go and tell David, this is what Yahweh says, I'm giving you 3 options, blah, blah, blah. Okay. So we have some glimpses of the society, that how different it is from ours. Here's another one. This is fascinating story. I don't have time to get into read all of it, but just pay attention to what it says about the society and how prophets fit into the power structure. For 3 years, there was no war between Aram and Israel. It's a northern kingdom in Aram, and it's in the kind of a country nearby. But in the third year, Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, who's from the south, went down. Just you go down from Jerusalem. So even though they're going north, it's still going down. He went down to see the king of Israel. He went north. The king of Israel has said to his officials, "Don't you know that Ramoth Gilead belongs to us, and yet we're doing nothing to retake it from the king of Aram? Let's recover lost land." Remember when David was king, Solomon was king? That was our land, and now we've lost it. The Arameans own it. So let's go get it back. Okay, that's what people are saying. So he asked Jehoshaphat, "Will you go with me to fight against Ramoth Gilead?" And Jehoshaphat replied to the king of Israel, "I am as you are, my people as your people, my horses as your horses." Okay, let's go. So here's the situation. We have two kings, the king of Israel and king of Judah, joining forces to fight Aram. Okay? Jehoshaphat happened to be a good king. He actually follows Yahweh. The king of Israel, Ahab, is actually horrible, just really bad. Okay. So here we have two kings joining together to fight, and Jehoshaphat says, "Well, wait a minute." And he said to the king of Israel, "First seek the counsel of Yahweh." So the king of Israel brought together the prophets, about 400 men. He's like, he has a whole collection here on the Rolodex. Get all the prophets together. And the 400 show up and ask them, "Shall I go to war against Ramoth Gilead, or shall I refrain?" And they go, they answer, for the Lord will give it into the king's hand. But Jehoshaphat asked, "Is there no longer a prophet of Yahweh here whom we can inquire of?" Which is a very strange idea, right? He says, "Ask for counsel." He says, "Get me the prophets." And Jehoshaphat says, "These really aren't the prophets of Yahweh." Okay. Somehow, by the way they answered, okay, he's like, "No, I'm not impressed with these guys. These guys are really unimpressive." Because I think Jehoshaphat knows something about Yahweh's true prophets. They tend to be very difficult to work with. Okay, this is too easy. Or you got 400 of them, they're all saying go. And Jehoshaphat's like, "Nah, this can't be right." Okay.
It's just chestnut.
The king of, and that's precisely the answer. The king of Israel answered to Jehoshaphat, "Well, there's still one prophet through whom we can inquire of Yahweh, but I hate him. Because he never prophesies anything good about me. It's always bad. He is Micaiah, son of Imlah. I hate this guy. He never says anything good." And Jehoshaphat like, "Well, that's the guy we want to talk to, right?"
So,
Yeah.
where the other prophet said, "For the Lord will give you into the king's hands," that word "Lord" that is used is different from the other names Lord.
I think so, but I have to look. But okay, this is where I wonder about the English, because I grabbed it right off the NIV 11. They should make the distinction between that's Yahweh and that's Adonai.
Ah, okay.
It should be two different words. But I don't know whether NIV 11 is, at least the digitized version of it is entirely accurate. Sometimes this might be they just didn't tap it as they should have. I have to think. I can take a look. Can you look that up real quick? for me?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah. This is 1 Kings 22,
Yeah.
verse 6.
No, it's lowercase.
Lowercase? Alright. So it's just Adonai then. Yeah.
It's Adonai.
Yeah.
I
Okay.
don't know, it's just a general
Name for
God.
Lord. For like it could be a person could be a Lord. So it's kind of a title for rulership. Right. So he's looking for Yahweh and King of Israel said, "Okay, well, I hate this guy." Okay. Now here we get a fascinating look at how prophecy works. Okay, how it actually works in real life. Okay, so dressed in their royal robes, the king of Israel and Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, were sitting on their thrones at the threshing floor by the entrance of the gate of Samaria, with all the prophets prophesying before them. Okay, so you have like 400 prophets, and they're doing things. So here's one. Zedekiah, son of Kenana, had made iron horns. So he's got like props. Okay? He declared, "This is what the Lord says. With these horns," you're probably like running around going like this, you know. I'm just guessing now. "You will gore the Arameans until they're destroyed." Okay? It's like, cool. They're putting on a show here. Okay? The prophets prophesy via visual, active demonstration. They use physical material. It's like when you have a pastor who goes up there, and they usually have a time for kids. They have a children's sermon. They usually have some kind of prop, right? That's what we're talking about here. We have a lot of props involved here. This is one of them. I just love it. It's like, okay, here's some iron horns. You're gonna gore the Arameans. All right. Okay. All the other prophets were prophesying the same thing. "Attack Ramoth Gilead and be victorious," is said. "For Yahweh," Now they're saying Yahweh now. Well, give it into the king's hand. Okay. So imagine 400 prophets taking their turn in front of the thrones, all doing their shtick. Okay. They probably dance, they probably jump around, I don't know exactly what they will all do, but imagine that scene. Okay. Now here's something even more interesting. Not more interesting, but there's something else that's going on. Peer pressure. Okay. The messenger who had gone to summon Micaiah said to him, "Look, the other prophets without exception are predicting the success of the king. Let your words agree with theirs and speak favorably." Okay. Everybody else is doing this. We don't want you to be different. The prophets need to organize and say the same things. Okay. So, but Micaiah says, "Surely as Yahweh lives, I can tell only what Yahweh tells me." So, when he arrived, the king asked him, because we've been waiting around for this guy, "Micaiah, should we go to war against Ramoth Gilead or not?" "Attack and be victorious," he answered, "for the Yahweh will give into the king's hand." Okay? And the king said to him, "How many times must I make you swear to tell me nothing but the truth in the name of Yahweh?" So he knows he's joking. Alright, because so Micaiah comes in, they want me to say this, I know what I'm supposed to say, go get him, yay, you know, and the king's like, come on, cut it out, okay, no sarcasm here. And Micaiah answered, "I saw all Israel scattered on the hills like sheep without a shepherd, and Yahweh said, these people have no master, let each one go home in peace." So shepherd's gone. What is he predicting?
The destruction.
He would die.
The death of the king. He's predicting the death of the king. That's not very nice. The king of Israel said to Jehoshaphat, "Didn't I tell you that he never prophesies anything good about me, but only bad? Didn't I tell you this?" Okay, we don't have time to read the rest of the story. It's great. Micaiah goes ahead and tells about his experience in the heavenly court, where he is called, where he saw lying spirits going out to lie to all the prophets. Yeah, it's like, whoa. So it's all kind of, and then so another prophet came, the guy earlier, Zedekiah, came and challenged him and slapped him on the face. Kind of this kind of thing, like, you know, my prophecy is good as your prophecy kind of thing. Kind of stuff that's going on. And Micaiah says, "Look, just wait." And the king said, "Fine, you're going to prison and if I come back." He didn't come back. So that's the story. That's the storyline. But what we're seeing here in this story, and we're talking about, while giving us a kind of a glimpse, kind of a sociological glimpse of how prophets function in ancient Israel, in terms of their status, there's amateur ones, there's professional ones that are kind of localized, then there are prophets that are like high up in the royal court and high influence. Like you can tell Nathan had walked to David and said, "That's bad," and David's like, "Oh, you're right." And it's just completely transformed. Then you have a situation like this where one prophet is facing 400. And his power, his words are diluted. The king's like, "I don't have to believe this guy, I'm going to believe these guys." Right? So we have these sociology, but really what's going on really is the rise of the king and the rise of the prophets and their opposition. Okay, in the storyline. Okay. So we have different kinds of prophets, really. If you look at the writing prophets, we have Isaiah, Micah, Ezekiel. Their primary task is teaching and preaching. We have court prophets like Nathan, Micaiah. They work for the king, and they serve as God's ambassador to the king. We have leadership prophets. They're different. They're like direct challenges. They stand outside the system. They directly challenge the king. So, for example, Elijah was the one who's basically challenging his king to reform, creating a showdown with the prophets of Baal and kill them all. I mean, that's what this prophet was doing. He was killing, slaughtering prophets of other religion. Okay.
But are you talking about different time periods also?
A little bit of that. I'm I will talk about the chronology in a bit. But I was just kind of talking about the word prophets is going to encompass a lot of different kind of activities. Okay, and that's a very good point because there is movement. Okay, there is movement, and we'll get to that in a bit. But precisely your point, which is initially when kings are amenable to words, you have prophets who exert their influence. For example, like people like Isaiah, a court prophet. Okay, who's also a writing prophet, but a court prophet. You have people like Nathan. You have people like what we just saw earlier, Gad, who are able to speak to the king and influence the king. Like for example, people like Jonah, who was able to speak to Jeroboam. These are prophets that are influencing the king. And then we have when kings are completely off the deep end. you have prophets that directly challenge them, become individual power centers. For example, Elisha had a kind of a prophetic school, a bunch of prophet disciples that follow him around. And in a sense, they're in the wilderness creating their own society. They're saying, this is the true people of God. That's no longer the true people of God. So kind of a separation. And then finally, we have the writing prophets, and we're going to get to that eventually. But we're most familiar with the writing prophets. The writing prophets have a different function than Elijah and Elisha. Okay, they are. It's a different. We'll see at the end. We'll answer that question at the end. How are the writing prophets different? Okay. Sorry, go ahead.
What was the function of diviners?
Diviners. So they're people who you use to find out what's going to happen, what God is going to do. So in ancient Israel, in the ancient world, everybody had diviners, because figuring out what God is up to, what gods are up to, is like the number one thing, most important thing in the world. Okay, you can figure out what we're going to win or lose in battle, whether this is a good thing. They're very highly religious people. Okay, now in the ancient Israel, in the law, they banned divination. They're saying you're not supposed to try to figure out things by cutting through animals and looking at entrails to figure out the future. Okay, but in Israel, there were diviners, even though they were banned.
Okay. So it was against the law. Then?
Yes.
Okay, I wasn't.
Yeah, but the priests had these two stones, Urim and Thummim, that they would throw to figure out God's answer to things. They had things like that, so you can actually go inquire of the prophets on things. So, it's kind of a. I think the difference is one is asking God, the other one is bypassing God and seeing in, for example, the stars, or seeing in the entrails of an animal what gods are up to. And I think that's banned, because that's kind of a magic thing, right? You're trying to read the future by palm reading. Those are all things that are banned.
Okay.
This is really interesting in the context of how we normally think of prophecy, like in the future.
Right.
This is what's going to happen in the future, which is really more like divination.
Exactly. We mix we think prophets are doing diviners. Actually, this is totally not what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So okay. A quick thought on this. This is just more of a way to plot prophets. You have prophets that are far out from the power center versus the court. Then you get prophets who are action-driven versus writing. So you probably put something like Isaiah in this corner here, court prophet, writing. You probably get Elijah as an action outcast, Elisha, action outcast prophets. And you have a mixture. For example, Amos would be probably a writing, not an action-driven, but writing and outcast prophet. So you have different quadrants. That quadrant is going to be understandably be bare. Okay, there are very few action prophets who are also court prophets. Okay, because action usually involves some kind of anti-establishment action. So if you're a court prophet, you're not doing a whole heck of a lot of let me organize resistance and challenge the king kinds of things. So that quadrant is going to be understandably empty.
Isn't the notion of writing prophet a little bit vague? Because Amos, I guess, still went to
Yes, he did.
places and,
Right.
and told the prophecies, but he didn't kill people.
Right. So what I mean by this is obviously it's a spectrum thing, right? They took actions. For example, even Ezekiel took actions. I mean, they have these. He walks around. Jeremiah, they walk around naked. They enact prophecies, but they're mostly about communication and teaching and writing. They didn't do things like Elijah, where he gathers around the prophets of Baal and says, okay, let's have a showdown, and then once you win, have them all killed. Okay. Those kind of actions. Elisha, who had the ability to ring down, having destroyed the soldiers, just kind of flatten them out with those kind of actions are very different. You don't see that of the prophets like Jeremiah or Isaiah or Ezekiel. Okay. It's a different type of act of prophecy, prophet behavior. Okay. Other questions? So this is just more of a way to help you think about plotting them in terms of recognizing the diversity of prophets. We're going to go to the writing prophets, because that's where we're in the prophetic literature. And Elijah and Elisha stories are in the primary history. And today we're going to focus on something that the primary history hasn't focused on as much. and Isaiah 1, that's the first. Isaiah is the first of the prophetic literature, and we're going to look at right at the beginning. Just, we end primary history. We go to the prophets. The vision concerning Judah and Jerusalem and Isaiah son of Amos saw during the reigns of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, kings of Judah. Hear me, you heavens, listen, earth, for the Yahweh has spoken. I reared children and brought them up, but they have rebelled against me. The ox knows its master, the donkey is its owner's manger, but Israel does not know, my people do not understand. Woe to the sinful nation, a people whose guilt is great. A brood of evildoers, children given to corruption. They have forsaken Yahweh, they have spurned the Holy One of Israel, and turned their backs on him. Okay, so we begin with, prophetic literature begins with a prophecy of condemnation. The big point is, this people don't know God, and they do evil. Right? I mean, I think that's pretty obvious. So they don't know God, and they do evil. They've forsaken Yahweh. Now, in primary history, the number one problem was idolatry. Okay, that's the number one problem. Again and again, they worship other. They inspire Yahweh to jealousy because they worship other gods. Okay, so you think if you read primary history, your primary concern is going to be, oh, this has something to do with lack of allegiance to God. We're not worshiping God properly. It's kind of a syncretism issues or polytheism issues. So we're going to see something else here. I'm going to read a little bit more and we keep going. Okay, why should you be beaten anymore? Why should you persist in rebellion? Your whole head is injured, your whole heart afflicted. From the sole of your foot to the top of your head there is no soundness, only wounds and welts and open sores, not cleansed or bandaged or soothed with olive oil. Your country is desolate. Your cities burned with fire. Your fields are being stripped by foreigners right before you, laid waste as when overthrown by strangers. Daughter Zion is like a shelter, left like a shelter in a vineyard, like a hut in a cucumber field, like a city under siege. Now, I have no idea what a hut in a cucumber field is supposed to mean, but you get the idea, okay? That somehow, it's lonely perhaps. It's alone. Maybe you have a hut that's kind of rising out of the cucumber field. Something like that. Okay, so we have destruction, we have prediction of destruction in prophecies. And then we get to something quite interesting. Unless Yahweh Almighty had left us some survivors, we would have become like Sodom. We would have been like Gomorrah. So we're kind of a result of grace here. Hear the word of Yahweh, you rulers of Sodom. Listen to the instruction of your God, you people of Gomorrah. The multitude of your sacrifices, what are they to me, says Yahweh? I have more than enough of burnt offerings, of rams and the fat of fattened animals. I have no pleasure in the blood of bulls and lambs and goats. When you come to appear before me, who has asked this of you, this trampling of my courts? Stop bringing meaningless offerings. Your incense is detestable to me. New moon, Sabbath, and convocations, I cannot bear your worthless assemblies. Okay, just stop right here. What's interesting about this people, I mean, if you read primary history, the problem, idolatry, turning away from God, not following the proper ways of worship. And then we hit this, and we suddenly are jarred, shocked. What is their problem? Are they not worshiping Yahweh? They are worshiping Yahweh. Okay? So if you see this passage, the writer of the prophetic literature, they are actually doing tons of sacrifices. They're doing worship, they're coming before, and the problem here is that God can't take this anymore. Too much sacrifices that are pointless. And if you go back, the problem is they don't know me. Right? The donkey's no master, donkey's no manger, Israel does not know, people doesn't understand. You have God and his people. The people don't know him, even though they're giving him tons and tons and tons of sacrifices. It's like a husband, the wife is like, you don't understand me at all. And the husband's like, yeah, but I bring you a flower every day.
I mean, don't I go to work and bring money to put on the table?
Something. She's like, you don't understand me. You don't know me. Yeah, but here's a flower. Flower. And eventually the flower's like, oh God, I'm so sick of flowers. Okay? That's the problem what's going on, okay? And we talked about this already, the problem of Emmanuel in the section on that, in which we talked about Moses knowing God personally. And the rest, we had to create this structure, this cultus, this way of distancing God from his people because he can't live with them. So what we have here now is that fruit now is really, that bad starting point is now giving out fruit, which is now you have a whole nation who all they know how to do is offer sacrifices and follow the rules. Right? They got it down. Okay? They have New Moon Festival, Sabbath Festival, they got all kinds of stuff. But what they don't have is any knowledge of who God is. And that just really ticks God off. Okay? I'm sick of the roses. Okay. Now, any questions on this so far?
Is he quoting one of the Psalms, or
I'm sorry?
is he quoting one of the Psalms, or one of the Psalms? It says, verse 11 seems very similar to a Psalm, but I can't remember which Psalm.
I think so too. But there are other places like this. You're absolutely right. There are other places like this. This theme of worship being very, very tiring for God is actually repeated in other places as well. We'll take a look at another passage that has this. But how is the lack of knowledge being manifested? Your new moon feast and your appointed festivals I hate with all my being. They have become a burden to me. I am weary of bearing them. Will you spread out your hands in prayer? I hide my eyes from you. Even when you offer many prayers, I am not listening. Your hands are full of blood. Wash and make yourselves clean. Take your evil deeds out of my sight. Stop doing wrong. Learn to do right. Seek justice. Defend the oppressed. Take up the causes of the fatherless. Plead the case of the widow. So now we're moving. Now people are going. We're moving from not knowing God to a condemnation of these empty worship, and then toward ethics. Okay, but I would say we're not really moving. We're saying the same things, which is people who know God. That knowledge manifests itself in certain ways in the society is organized. A people of God's people has certain ways of organizing society. Okay, and that involves taking care of those who are powerless. The people of God, the primary characteristics being manifested is how they take care of the powerless. I think you talk to any Old Testament person, Old Testament scholar, they would tell. And I ask them, what are the big sins of Israel? Two things: idolatry and social injustice. That's it. Just read through the prophets. I'm going to give you a bunch of passages, but there's tons more. Just read through Jeremiah, read through Isaiah. Idolatry, social injustice. That's really it. Okay, those are the big ones. The people of God are defined by their worship of Yahweh, their commitment to Yahweh, and by how they take care of the most powerless among them. And that will cause them to stand out among the nations. The nation will see this going, cool. Okay? So learn to do right. Seek justice, mishpat, which does not merely mean following the rules. It means actively establish fairness and justice in the world. It's very much active. And which they define right here for you: defend the oppressed, take up the cause of the fatherless, plead the case of the widow. I don't have to define it. I don't have to explain justice. Just at the mishpat, it's right there. It's explained for you. Okay, it is very much an active kinds of thing, and making things right. And this sentiment is expressed much more compactly in Micah 6:6-8, which I think people should be very familiar with this passage. One of the more famous passages in the Old Testament. It's the same contrast. With what shall I come before Yahweh and bow down before the exalted God? Shall I come before Him with burnt offerings, with calves a year old? Should I get a really good offering? Will the Lord be pleased? Okay, now that's one. And here's okay. Let's go hyperbole. Will Yahweh be pleased with thousands of rams? I'm gonna give you one with a year old. That's pretty good. But let's go with 1,000 here. Let's go nuts. 10,000 rivers of olive oil. Not even like liter. We're talking about rivers. All right, I'm gonna go nuts. Let's do it. Shall I offer my firstborn for my transgression, the fruit of my body for the sins of my soul? Is that what we want to do? So let's do child sacrifice. All right? If we really want to talk about sacrificing and offering things that are precious. Okay? Questions. And verse 8, the answer. He has shown you, O man, or mortal, Adam, what is good, and what Yahweh require of you. To act mishpat. To do mishpat. Okay? To create justice in your society, and to love chesed, which is not mercy, but love expressed through the covenant. Okay? Love structured by the covenant with God, by the Torah. Okay? To love that, and then to walk humbly with God. Have a relationship with God, to love via the structure of the covenant, and to establish justice in society. That's all he wants. In contrast to all this is what knowledge of God is, and following God means. This is very much Isaiah. I think people are talking about Micah and Isaiah. They're somewhat contemporaries, and there may be mutual borrowing to different speakers. Possibly. I think Micah saw what Isaiah was preaching going, that's too long, let's shorten it. This is much cooler. You're not going to get arguments for dependence here, but I think the idea is probably out there. This contrast between worship and then social justice. And saying having one without the other really just empty. It's absolutely pointless.
The whole study of Jeremiah, the whole book of Jeremiah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, this idea is very much present. This idea of ritual, empty rituals versus obedience. So what God wants is, I know people have wrong expectations of the Old Testament. They think Old Testament is about, following rules. The Old Testament is about transformation. Okay, what God wants is people who know Him and live a transformed life. Okay, and this stuff, that's kind of to prevent God from killing His people because He can't take it anymore. Okay? But ultimately He's going to get sick of this. When there's too much of it. When there's a rose every single day, and the wife's getting more and more mad, so now there's rose every 3 times a day. Okay? Question.
Okay, so
Yeah.
people that came, in Jesus' period of time, the Second Temple period, read this.
Yeah.
How did it interpret as such?
That's a great question. And I would say, look, it wasn't Jesus who summarized the greatest rules of Torah. Right, the greatest commandments in Torah. It was well known within the Second Temple literature and the rabbinic circle. The 2 greatest laws are love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself.
That was well known.
Everybody knew that. So they read this. They knew it. Okay, but you want to talk about no, you can solve that problem. Compartmentalization. Who's my neighbor? That becomes the question now, right? If I'm a Pharisee, who do I hate? I hate Gentiles. I hate the Romans. I want to destroy them. So I'm following my Torah. I'm following Torah to do what? To accomplish the destruction of the Romans. Do I know God? Do I know the heart of God at all? The heart of God who wants to bless the nations?
Okay.
Right? God wants to bless the nation, wants to use Israel as a way to blessing the nations. I want the Romans gone. I want the Romans dead. Okay, I am going to follow Torah so tightly and so closely, so as to, forget the Romans. Let's talk about the Samaritans. I hate the Samaritans' guts, and I'm going to follow that so tightly and so closely, so as to get to the point where God comes in and act on our behalf and destroy them. God's like, you gotta be kidding me. You gotta be kidding me, right? Now, so Jesus, he asked the question, what are the greatest commandments? And Jesus says, he says those 2. He goes, you spoke correctly. And he said, what's my neighbor? Who's my neighbor? Because that's the everywhere, that's the everything question. I only have to love the people that are in my little group. I don't have to love people outside. And so when Jesus tells that story about the Samaritan, he says, that enemy you hated, he's the one who's acting correctly. He is blowing apart this guy's lines about who neighbors are. Right? So that's what that story's about. And that's what you're talking about. When they read this, they go, okay, I should act justly and love mercy with my people. I don't have to do that with anybody outside. Right? And so a Pharisee would totally love this passage. Yeah. They were some of the most just people around. Yeah.
Jesus can just open their eyes for more.
He's basically saying, you do realize that your entire line of thinking is completely antithetical to the mission, which is to bless the nations. You've completely missed the point of why Israel was called. I mean, that's where the problem is. your hyper Torah observance, based out of your need, your desire to kick out the Romans. They're harming your people who are under this burden of legalism and under this burden of having to follow these rules all the time, right? So it's very interesting. It's a perspective problem.
So what is Hesed again?
So this is translated like loving kindness. It's translated a whole bunch of different ways. The word Hesed, if you want to think about it, is love and law joined together. I will have much more to say about this next time, because we're going to talk a little bit about Ruth, and this is one of the key words in Ruth. But maybe I can, as a little preview, Hesed is my strong compassion and love for you expressed through covenantal structure. So, how do I love you? I'm going to follow the root. I'm going to live out the Torah with a heart of love behind it, rather than a kind of surface. So let me see if I can. You know what? I have a better way. We're going to look at some passage in Leviticus right next slide, and I'll talk about the difference between Hesed and what they would be doing, what a non-Hesed person would be doing. How's that? Let's take a look at this one. I want to get at this because this is from our primary history, but we didn't touch on it because we really didn't focus very much on social justice. And Manasseh was described as filling Jerusalem with innocent blood, and it was one of the worst kings. But in terms of the storyline, social justice didn't really pop up in primary history, but it is powerfully present in prophets, which then is really referring back to some parts of the Levitical code. Okay, you know, talk about the foundation of a just society in which there's no oppression of the powerless. What you do is you try to create a situation where there is no powerless. Okay. You try to create a way in which nobody falls into a permanent state of powerless poverty, so that they can be exploited. Okay. And this is kind of one of the underlying structures. A couple things here. One. Yahweh said to Moses on Mount Sinai, "Speak to the Israelites and say to them, when you enter the land I'm going to give you, the land itself must observe a Sabbath to Yahweh. For 6 years sow your fields, for 6 years prune your vineyards and gather their crops. But in the 7th year the land is to have a year of Sabbath rest, a Sabbath to Yahweh. Do not sow your fields or prune your vineyards. Do not reap what grows of itself or harvest the grapes of your untended vines. The land is to have a year of rest. Whatever the land yields during the Sabbath year will be food for you, for yourself, your male and female servants, and the hired worker and temporary resident who live among you, as well as for your livestock and wild animals in your land. Whatever the land produces may be eaten." Okay. So, now let's not think about how this might apply in the 21st century, and I can't imagine how this is going to work. But land is the source of sustenance and wealth in the ancient world. First thing you do, you work 6 years. On the 7th, you take a break. Okay. The underlying theory of this is that the land doesn't belong to you. The land belongs to God. So you have certain use rights only. What they call usufruct, I think is the more technical term. You have land use rights. You do not have ownership rights. Ownership rights becomes more absolute. Land use rights means, okay, you must follow the rules of the owner. And the owner says, the 7th year, stop. Okay. No work on the 7th year. So you grow. In the 7th year, there's going to be some natural growth that comes out of it, and you can eat of it. But who else can eat of it? Hired worker, temporary resident who live among you. Anybody can go in there and just grab food off your land. Okay. So built into this, once every 7th year, there is some kind of an ability for people who are in the fringe of society to come in and just kind of get food. And you can eat there too, but the animals get to eat it too. Okay. Everybody gets. This is like once every 7 years. There's a whole section that the land is kind of stopped, and everybody's like eating everything. Okay. The ownership boundaries gets weakened tremendously on the 7th year.
Now, does the 7th year happen same year for everyone, or can they like shift?
That's a very interesting question. Like different tribes, different villages at different 7th year.
Yeah.
So I was under the impression that it's the same 7th year.
Okay.
Right. But it's a good question That would have been a good idea, I thought. You know, like that village has that 7th year that way. You know, we all have food who can trade that kind of
No,
stuff.
I think that is the case because on the
Yeah.
7th of those 7th years, the year
Yeah.
after that is the
Jubilee.
Jubilee.
So exactly,
year,
which means
you
they
know,
couldn't
and
do it.
that's like the whole community is all
Right.
celebrating together. So I
Right.
think that would indicate that this was everybody.
It wouldn't work.
on the same schedule.
I agree. So the schedule is correct. Now, look at verse 20. It just it shoots in here a little bit. And it jumps to verse 20 because suddenly Moses is like, oh, wait a minute, there's a problem with this. So let's try to solve the problem, okay? Then we'll go back to verse 8. You may ask, what will we eat in the 7th year if we do not plant or harvest our crops? Okay? So God says, I will send you such a blessing in the 6th year, the land will yield enough for 3 years. While you plant during the 8th year, you will eat from the old crop and will continue to eat from it until the harvest of the 9th year comes in. So we're going to have a big boom in the 6th, so you stop 1/7 and have enough to during the harvesting, the planting during the 8th, so that you will get through 3 years. Okay, you're going to be okay. All right? So,
That's a huge risk.
huh?
Huge risk.
It's a huge risk. So you notice that in the very action, faith is built into this, right? This is all about by resting on that 7th year. What I'm saying is, this land does not belong to me; it belongs to God, and I'm following His land use rights. I'm not going to abuse this land use rights. Second, it's saying is, I'm going to have faith that God's going to provide. That we live here, this entire venture of creating Israel is a venture of faith. Okay? We're going to create a society that's going to be so different, other people are going to say, wow, check that out. Okay? They don't work their land on the 7th year. What a bunch of nut bars. Okay? But then they're going to go, yeah, but look, they don't have any poor people either. Okay? Wow, that's a fair society. Okay? In which they're at peace with the wild animals. Animals are coming in, they're like, okay, we have cohesion, we have this harmony with creation. Like, wow. Okay.
Did the
So-
Pharisees implement these Levitical rules?
They couldn't. They don't have the control.
And then farmers.
They wanted to, but they couldn't. Cause
Oh, I don't know if they wanted to or not. We never got that far. I mean, they were emphasizing things that were much more, I would say, externally driven. Like, how do you keep the Sabbath? Were big. Food laws were big. Land laws, they had no control over whatsoever. Sorry, go ahead.
But as far as we know, nobody ever did this at all.
Yeah, we'll get to that.
Okay.
Well, actually, yeah, they never celebrated the Jubilees. We'll get to, yeah,
They never
but
did the Jubilee. Did they even do the 7 years?
that's a good question. There was no comment about that.
There's no evidence. Of
Yeah, no, they did that. Yeah. So no, I mean that's a good point. Which I mean, they came in and really just dumped all this. This is not going to work. Okay, so we're getting at the rebellion here. This seems very idealistic, incredibly idealistic. You're like, I would never do that. Okay, right. So there's a problem here. But you're right. The Pharisees focused on laws that distinguished the people of God from Gentiles, and land laws were not under their control and probably didn't do enough to distinguish. They were looking for Sabbath, food, those kind of things. Okay. Back to verse 8. And that's what we're talking about the Jubilee. Count off 7 Sabbath years, 7 times 7 years, so that the 7th Sabbath year come down to a period of 49 years. Then have a trumpet sounded everywhere on the 10th day of the 7th month. On the day of atonement, sound the trumpet throughout your land. Consecrate the 50th year and proclaim liberty throughout the land to all its inhabitants. It should be a Jubilee year for you, which of course, back up, never happened. Nobody ever did a Jubilee year. Each of you is to return your family property and to your own clan. Return to your family property, to your own clan. The 50th year should be a Jubilee for you. Do not sow and do not reap what grows of itself, or harvest the untended vines. For it is the Jubilee and is to be holy for you. Eat only what is taken directly from the fields. In this year of Jubilee, everyone is returned to their own property. If you sell land to any of your own people or buy land from them, do not take advantage of each other. You are to buy from your own people on the basis of the number of years since the Jubilee, and they are to sell it to you on the basis of the number of years left for harvesting crops. When the years are many, you are to increase the price, and when the years are few, you are to decrease the price, because what is really being sold to you is the number of crops. Do not take advantage of each other, for fear your God. I am Yahweh your God. Okay. No ownership of land. So how do you sell land? You don't sell land, you sell use rights. Right? So we are 2 years away from Jubilee. I'm selling this piece of land to you based on 2 years of crops. You can use it for 2 years, and after that, you get it back to me. I'm selling you now. We're 49 years just after Jubilee. 49 years. Okay, I'm giving you land right for 49 years, which means you should pay me a lot for it. Okay, and then after that, I'll get it back. What does this guarantee? It guarantees that there's no permanent underclass in Israel. Some people are going to mess up their land. Some people are going to mess up their priorities, and they're going to get poor, and they're going to be forced to sell. They're going to lose their land.
But the children,
And the children grow up, they'll get their land back. That's how this is supposed to work. There will be no permanent underclass in Israel. You divide up the clans, divide into families, and the families inherit their land, and if they go into a trouble in a couple of a generation, the next generation gets it back. Okay. So this is one of the key foundation of a just society in ancient Israel. Okay. The mechanism for production, the resources, the source of wealth and sustenance is nationalized. Sounds horrible. Let's not go that way. It's not nationalized. It just belongs to God, and it can never be sold. Okay. Very different understanding from our society today. I don't really know how you're actually able to actually do anything like that today, except to say that the foundational drive, the goal, is clear. To make sure that one generation doesn't pay for a previous generation's mistake. Okay, so that you do everything to restore and recover and create equity in society, in their society, and that's the foundation of a just society for Israel. Okay.
Nor does it prevent consolidation of lots of wealth.
Oh yeah, we'll get to that later. Yeah, you can't. You can never own more land than you started with. Then you can probably end up owning a lot of sheep. You end up growing a lot of crops and owning a lot of money, having a lot of other ways of storing wealth. But what you won't be able to do is just amass land.
Well, your property is only this big, you only have that much sheep.
Yes, this is true. So you're kind of screwed up. But I'm sure there are ways to accumulate gold and silver, maybe if smaller ones. There are ways to accumulate wealth, but just not through real estate. Because land was the primary means of sustenance and wealth. It is what everybody did. So,
And we could find practical problems with this, but we could say like the spirit is to create an equitable society.
right. So you would say, okay, now we can't do anything with it today, but the goal is always clear: create an equitable society in which there's no permanent underclass. And then here's the thing. Here's what it says: don't take advantage of each other. This whole system only works if there's a fundamental goodwill among people. Okay? Because this gets ugly. Because let's say I buy your land from you, and what if I don't give it back? How will you get it back? Those kind of issues. Let's say you become disempowered. Let's say you one generation really screws up, so the kids coming up like they have no power, no influence, no wealth. That's my land, but they can't get it back, and then they go sue and ask the judges, and the judges are like, well, that guy has more money to offer me. So that's it. And so this really is counting on a whole society of people who really want to have this mission in mind of living a missional society. A society that's kind of everybody must see this and see what God's capable to accomplish. And if people don't have that in mind, this thing's going to fall apart, like it did. It didn't work.
there was no concept of leases back then?
Huh?
No concept of leases back then?
Leases? Well, I suppose this is a lease.
Right.
It's what it is. It's a lease.
But you have to follow it.
But it's a long-term lease, right? It's a long-term lease, right? So I'm going to sell you use rights for 15 years, because I'm out of money and we don't have no food. We take it, now we don't have any land anymore. So what if I blow all that and my kids grow up, they got nothing, and there's no jubilee? I should get that land back. But the judges are corrupt and they're being bribed. It's over. And then you have these underclass exploited, becoming slaves and becoming impoverished. The society falls apart. Increasingly dominated by certain types of people. Let's continue on. Sorry. The land must not be sold permanently. Let's just make it clear, because the land is mine. Okay, so I didn't make that part up. This part is exactly what God says. And you reside in my land as foreigners and strangers. You don't own this thing. I own this thing. It's God's point. Throughout the land that you hold as a possession, you must provide for the redemption of the land. And now we can a little more details about how to pull this off. If one of your fellow Israelites becomes poor and sells some of their property, their nearest relative is to come and redeem what they have sold. Okay, so this is where we get to Ruth and that whole story about redeemers. If, however, there is no one to redeem for them, but later on they prosper and acquire sufficient means to redeem it themselves, they are to determine the value for the years since they sold it and refund the balance to the one to whom they sold it. They can then go back to their own property. But if they do not acquire the means to repay, what was sold will remain in the possession of the buyer till the year of Jubilee. It will be returned in the Jubilee and then go back to the property. If I'm poor, I need to sell. Close relatives, buy it back. That way it's in the hand of a close relative. Chances of being returned are much higher. It stays within the clan, benefiting the clan. If they don't have it, if I get money back later, I get rich again, I always have the right to buy it back. Okay? So you understand that this is like a pawn shop maybe? Where you have I don't know how you have the right to reclaim it before they sell it, but I don't know how long that is. But you have the right to get it back. And if you don't have the money, you never make the money, Jubilee, you'll get it back. So it's really specifying the details how this works. Okay. Any questions on this? Why this is so critical? Okay. So I said I was going to talk to you about the difference between Hesed and not Hesed. So in Ruth, Boaz is the redeemer, the person who has the ability to buy back the land. But it's a choice. Okay, he doesn't have to. Nowhere does it say the nearest relative has to do it. Okay, but what he does, I mean, if you look at Ruth, that Boaz is so careful to follow the Torah, the precise rules and regulations. He has this tremendous desire to take care of Ruth and Naomi, and the way he does it is via the pathways laid out in the Torah. Okay, and that's Chesed. It's a love that's structured by law.
And it helps that the laws are just, that the laws are merciful.
I'm sorry.
It helps that the laws are merciful.
Yes.
That the laws are just.
Right. Well, when I say law, I mean Torah.
Right.
I mean God's law.
Right.
Right. Not any law. Yeah. So very much Hesed is a balance of that recognition of the structure that's created by the Torah, and then operating within it to express love and compassion. And the problem with the Pharisees, of course, is they have the Torah without the love and compassion, and so there's always this kind of difficult balance. But I think when we talk about Ruth, we'll see it much more clearly, because there's also the laws of gleaning, how to glean properly. All these Levitical laws show up in Ruth because of this. Okay. Questions? No. Okay. Let's come back to this. See what happens. Now I know that this passage has been around for a while, and I've read this many times. We're still in Isaiah 5, by the way. We're still kind of the beginning part of Isaiah, and you've heard. I think I've done this before in earlier classes, but I'll read it. It's Israel's God's vineyard, this land idea. I will sing for the one I have a love song about his vineyard. My loved one had a vineyard on a fertile hillside. He dug it up and cleared of stones and planted with the choicest vines. He built a watchtower in it and cut out a vine press as well. Then he looked for a crop of good grapes, but it yielded only bad fruit. So this metaphor of the land being Israel, being God's land, is relevant because of what happens next. But we'll keep going. Now you dwellers in Jerusalem and people of Judah, judge between me and my vineyard. What more could have been done for my vineyard than I have done for it? When I looked for good grapes, why did it yield only bad? Now I will tell you what I'm going to do to my vineyard. I will take away its hedge, and it will be destroyed. I will break down its wall. It will be trampled. I will make it a wasteland, neither prune nor cultivate it, and briars and thorns will grow there. I will command the clouds not to rain on it. The vineyard of Yahweh Almighty is the nation of Israel. and the people of Judah are the vines he delighted in. And he looked for justice and saw bloodshed. For righteousness he heard cries of distress. Woe to you who add house to house and join field to field. Okay. What's the problem? This is the problem. Till no space is left and you live alone in the land. I'm going to make houses join together and create mass amount of real estate so that I'm the only one there. I look around, hey, there's nobody around. Can't even see your neighbors anymore. Lord Almighty has declared in my hearing, surely the great houses will become desolate, the fine mansions are left without occupants. A 10-acre vineyard will produce only a bath of wine, a homer of sea will yield only an ephah of grain. Forget that, it just means you're going to have low efficiency in production. Okay. Why am I talking about this? Okay. He's talking about vineyard, Israel, as being creating lousy wild grapes. The biggest concern is justice about land. Right? There's bloodshed. There's cries of distress. Here's your problem. They're not following any of the things laid out in Leviticus. What they destroyed the foundation for a just society. They created opportunities for this thing to happen, which then leads to things like this. Once you take away the foundation, Amos says, for 3 sins of Israel, even for 4 I will not relent. They will sell the innocent for silver and the needy for a pair of sandals. If we have a permanent class of underclass and they cannot recover their source of sustenance, then they become playthings of the wealthy and the powerful. They trample on the heads of the poor as on the dust of the ground and deny justice to the oppressed. Father and son are using the same girl and so profane my holy name. That line is about possibly temple prostitutes. So we're blending social injustice with idolatry. Okay. Then I said, listen, you leaders of Jacob, you rulers of Israel, should you not embrace justice? You who hate good and love evil, who tear the skin from my people and the flesh from their bones, who eat my people's flesh, strip off their skin and break their bones in pieces, who chop them up like meat for the pan, like flesh for the pot. They will cry out, Yahweh, he will not answer them. At that time he will hide his face from them because of the evil they have done. Okay. I think the message is pretty clear. Any questions? Yes.
According to 9:7 was the same girl. Does that mean like that the girl was like working in the like
Most likely a temple prostitute, yeah.
But was the temple prostitute someone who was like of the underclass?
That's a good question. The connection between that line and the other. It seems possible. I mean, that's a good connection.
Make like a living and then also like the
Right.
contract it out.
So it's a possibility that what ends up happening is you have poverty driving people into prostitution or into becoming part of the idol worship prostitution, temple prostitution. Right. So go ahead.
So this is not something that God held against David. It was Solomon.
This was not something they held against David and Solomon. Which part?
Oh, about land use and
Right. So why didn't God say? So that was my point. The primary history did not talk about social justice very much.
the focus was much more on the temple.
Focus on the temple. Focus on David covenant, and the main focus is on idol worship, syncretism, worshiping of other religion.
Okay, so this is where you're talking about the two different
Yes.
stories.
Primary history has its own emphasis. The primary problem is they worship other God. You read that. You read that at the end of Kings. In the second Kings, you have, why did Israel get taken away? They angered God with the sins of Jeroboam. They worship other idols. They worship Baal. They worship Ashtaroth, all that stuff. Same thing with the end of second Kings. There's just as a listing of the things they did wrong. Remember Manasseh? Whole listing of what he did. Bring the starry host into the temple, sacrificing this, sacrificing children. It was all cultic related.
So this stream of storytelling is telling, wow, it's not only that, there's something else also.
You got it. Prophets are supplementing the primary history story. Right? So, primary history, they veered off and started worshiping other gods. And notice that, Manasseh, there's one line about filling Jerusalem with blood, innocent blood. One line about social injustice. Everything else was about what he missed, how he messed up the temple. So you can say the primary history his person has a one-track mind about worshiping God and not worshiping other gods. That's the one thing. The prophets come along and say, Yeah, they weren't worshiping other gods. There's plenty of that in the prophets. But there's a major problem here. Okay? The problem wasn't just that they messed up relationship with God. The problem is that they're failing in their role as God's light and salt in the world. How are they supposed to bless the nations? They were supposed to show the world a different kind of nation. And they weren't living that at all. They don't know God at all.
Well, they're related. I mean, if you don't worship God
Right.
rightly, or
Right.
you don't know God,
Yeah.
you are going to mess up your relationship with your neighbor.
Right. And that's a very good point. And whereas the prophets will come on and say, which is why the primary history never mentioned God got sick of the worship. The prophets come on and says, you know what, God's really sick of this. Okay? Because this is where the problem is. It's your worship. You can get all the worship down perfectly, and you're worshiping Yahweh and only Yahweh, and all that stuff, and you're doing your sacrifices and all that stuff. When you're not doing this, none of it matters. Okay, so it's a supplement or a complement, if you will, to the primary history.
I wonder if in verse 7, Father and Son using the same role as profane my holy name,
Yeah.
might also refer to David, sort of David and his son, who eventually, you know.
You mean Absalom? Yeah. True. Except I'm okay. I'm not sure if this would be a reference to David and Absalom.
Mm-hmm.
There is a situation where Absalom intentionally. But you're right. I mean, obviously, it was a grotesque thing to do, to violate your father's concubines. But in this situation, I think they're talking about a generic social practice. That if you have a father and son going to the same temple prostitute, yeah. Questions? Other questions about this? So today we really have just one big point. It's really not a complicated point, but because primary history really kind of didn't talk about it very much, well, I want to spend a whole session on it, which is the idea of social justice, how Israel's supposed to be different, really is designed in their land. That's really kind of the, if you want to think about how Israel's supposed to be different, they were creating a foundationally different structure. Okay, at least that's what God had in mind. And if you try to pull that off, and if you have people of goodwill, and Ruth would be an example we have to look at, where it almost seemed to be working. Right? Ruth was a story in which it actually kind of worked. And then we see what happens when it doesn't work. The whole thing falls apart, and at some point, Israel stops being a nation that could serve any function whatsoever.
I just want to point out that this still has very real implications today
Yep.
in how we manage land. I mean, these lines about joining house to house and field to field, like, I mean, go drive through the Chicago suburbs or drive through Iowa.
Okay.
You will see very few farms, only cornfields and soybean fields, wall to wall to wall to wall to wall for miles and miles.
You see no houses.
No houses, dying communities, you know, no small towns or driving out neighbors.
Okay.
And it impacts water quality, local water quality. I mean, even in Wisconsin, people can't drink the water in their own wells because of manure pollution from CAFOs.
And they don't care because they don't live there. Whereas if you live on the farm itself, you would be very concerned about water quality in your own in your farm.
Yeah, I mean, they don't care about their next door neighbors. They would rather just
okay.
like sell them out.
Right,
You know?
right.
Yeah, so I mean, neighbors are being torn apart in Wisconsin, in Kewaunee County, Ozaukee County, like this year.
Right.
There's CAFO permits, you know, going in.
Wow.
The dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico, like corn and soybean farmers in Iowa and Illinois are putting shrimp farmers in Louisiana out of business. You know, so all these things that are
Right.
here are like also tearing our own society
Right.
apart,
Right.
and
Because we haven't really solved the problem.
right,
Right.
and
Which is the
we're
fundamental-
still pushing more real estate sort
Right.
of development. Land prices are skyrocketing, so if you want to start a small family farm, you can't. And then there's like a new legislation that's just been introduced, you know, that would allow foreign companies to own lots of land in Wisconsin.
Okay. Wow.
So, you know, again, like sort of driving it through real estate and
Right.
there's no, I mean, the local Wisconsinites aren't asking for
Right,
this.
right.
It's the real estate developers and
So our solution to problems like this is to more laws, make the laws more precise and make it more straight. Whereas you notice this law here, it's about don't take advantage of each other. It counts on goodwill, right? And I think that's a foundational difference between an understanding that says if the law does not prohibit it, I can do it,
right.
which I think is our mindset. If it doesn't say you can't, it means you can. Right? Which I think is I would argue, a rights-based approach. We have the 10 amendments to the Constitution that has restrictions on government so that we have rights. The Bible has the 10 commandments that doesn't talk about your rights, it talks about your obligations. It isn't that you have a right to life, it says you do not kill. Right? It does not say you have a right to property, it says you should not steal. So it's all about the kingdom of God ethics is oriented to the person and their responsibility to their neighbors. Our society is based on I have rights that my laws are protecting for me, and therefore a government has an obligation to me, other people have an obligation to me and my rights. And if the law doesn't prohibit it, I can do it. So what ends up happening is it's an arms race between law, the writing of laws, and the exploitation. Right? I can come up with more and more and more laws, make it more precise, and then I'm going to try to find a way of getting around it, and that's the arms race between lawyers and lawmakers. Versus this is don't take advantage of each other.
So, like the Old Testament law
Yeah.
can be thought of as an articulation of like an inner law, rather than like something that God is imposing on people.
It's hesed. It's I have love for my neighbors. How do I express it? I'm going to express it in the way we do land.
How is Torah and Hesed different? What is the difference between Torah and Hesed?
So Torah means instruction.
Okay.
I would say what God wants. I mean, if you want to go with Jesus, says that the heart of the Torah is love God and love neighbors. Okay. You have what that means is you begin with a strong desire for the well-being of others. Okay. How do you express that? The Torah says, okay, I'll help you with that. The Torah says, you love neighbor, I want to show you how to love a neighbor properly. Okay? Because it's not easy to love neighbor. It takes wisdom to do it. So, you want to do it? Let's create a society that does this. That's chesed in action. Okay? Now, if you lose that internal love, then this becomes something you have to do. Now it doesn't work anymore. Right? It will get perverted, it will get corrupted, they will find ways to bend around it. Okay? And that's always been the problem. The law was always intended as an expression of an inner reality. Right? So, love people.
So it starts with Hesed, and then Torah is how it's implemented.
Yes. So Hesed is
The instruction for
love
implementing.
structured by Torah.
Okay.
Right? Love expressed through the application of Torah. And if you lose the initial love, that's not going to work. If you lose the Torah, it's wild. It's like, I don't know how to do it.
Right.
Without the Torah, you have this desire, but you know how to put it in action. It's action without wisdom. Right? So you need a combination of love and wisdom to make things work.
So does that love come from like compassion or respect?
Question, isn't it? I mean, that's the great question of the Old Testament, which is, why don't people do this? I mean, why do they take advantage of each other? Right? And the question of why does Adam and Eve want to do things on their own? Why did they rebel against God? Why did the Israelites continually rebel against God? And that's kind of the underlying question that gets all the way into the New Testament, which is, how will the people be different? It's clear that they don't have Hesed. They don't have the underlying love, so that whenever they try to live out the Torah, it's surface. It's something that they're trying to pervert or break. When they worship God, it's done on a kind of a hand-waving or even like manipulative way. I will give God a sacrifice so He'll give me something. Right? It's never out of that internal thing. And so the New Testament says, you need a fundamental renewed person. And that's kind of the New Testament answer to the Old Testament, which is humanity 2.0. We need a renewed person, new Holy Spirit, God pouring the love of God into us in Romans. So God helps us love Him. Okay. So we will talk about that not the next time, the week after that, the time after that. We'll talk about what is the hope of what are the prophets offering at the end of the story of the primary history. But we have, but so people ask me, what's the point of this then? You know, they don't have the hesed. God says, if you have hesed, live it out this way, it'll be awesome. And they don't have it. They can't love. Okay, and so what we've done, I think I think the Old Testament creates a vision of what God has in mind. It also shows you the ways in which humanity cannot come through, does not work. And the New Testament says, here's the way we're going to marry both of them together. Okay. Which is why Jesus says, I come not to destroy the law, but to fulfill it. I'm going to help you actually love God and love neighbors.
Would it be fair to say that the people that are nearest to living out this is the Amish, for example, or?
I don't know if they have love or not. I mean, they probably do. I'm not sure. I think the New Testament is not trying to say it needs to be like this. Okay, but whatever is we have today needs to be compassion lived out through wisdom. Some kind of wise way to organize society such that we do not have permanent poor, that people are not exploited, that we're trying to create a society in which people, I would say, forget that, Christians are called to be a source of compassion in society and acting so that permanent poor do not exist and people are not exploited. So we're into structural changes as well as fighting individual cases of injustice. I think we're called to do both. I think there's no getting around that. The prophets were pissed about this, as you can see.
Yeah. So also you only refer to the writing prophets. You haven't referred to the other prophets yet.
Right. And I would say the reason for that is if you look at, and actually the reason I did that is because I have my final slide. I want to show you something that's very interesting at the beginning, at the end, at chapter 6. We've been looking at Isaiah 1, Isaiah 5, talking about justice. There's a lot of other stuff, but Isaiah 6 is a really strange, it's almost kind of, I would say, a seminal moment. Okay, I mean, this is a very famous passage, by the way, and you all know it, right? And I'm going to read this and see what you think. In the year the king Uzziah died, I saw the Lord high and exalted, seated on a throne. The train of his robe filled the temple. It's very famous, this section. Above him were seraphim, each with 6 wings. With 2 wings they covered their faces, with 2 they covered their feet, and with 2 they were flying. And they were calling one to another, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord Almighty. The whole earth is full of his glory. At the sound of their voices, the doorposts and thresholds shook, and the temple was filled with smoke. Okay, so this is what we call a vocation scene, or in which the prophet receives his calling. He sees the grand king, the emperor. He goes into the throne, and he is now called and commissioned as a prophet. Okay, so this is where Isaiah receives his commissioning. Okay, woe to me, I cried, I am ruined, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips, and my eyes have seen the King, Yahweh Almighty. Then one of the seraphim flew to me with a live coal in his hand, which he had taken with his tongue from the altar. With it he touched my mouth and says, See, this has touched your lips, your guilt is taken away, and your sin is atoned for. In Ezekiel, you have something like this, where he makes him eat a scroll. In Jeremiah, you have something where he touches his lips. They're kind of this, because prophets are going to speak. So there's some kind of a lip thing going on here, okay? So all the prophets have this vocation narrative that tells you that they have met God and they're being commissioned to something. So what is Isaiah commissioned to do? Then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, Whom shall I send, and who will go for us? And I said, Here am I, send me. He said, Go and tell this people, be ever hearing but never understanding, be ever seeing but never perceiving. Make the heart of this people callous, make their ears dull and close their eyes. Otherwise they might see with their eyes, hear with their ears, understand with their hearts, then turn and be healed. What is Isaiah's commission?
Confuse people?
Yeah. You got it. So I want to point something out, when you were getting at about Elijah and Elisha. Elijah was fighting for the heart and soul of Israel, the northern kingdom. Okay, he said, okay, here's my solution. they're doing Baal worship. If I just kill all the Baal priests, okay, let's have a showdown. Let's do a Baal versus Yahweh showdown. Everybody sees Yahweh's able to pull this off. We're going to be fine. So we have this big showdown with a big barbecue. Who God can barbecue what? And Yahweh shows up, and Israel says, yes, Yahweh is God. And they killed all the Baal prophets. And then Elijah said, cool. And then nothing happened. Israel's king still worshiped Baal. The queen came after him. And he's like, I'm all alone. Nothing happened. This whole thing's a mistake. And he gives up his calling as a prophet. He says, this doesn't work. It's all your fault, God. And God says, fine. I'll get your replacement. Get Elisha. Appoint him. And then Elijah follows him for a while. Elijah then gets taken away in the chariot. Elisha takes over. So we have these attempts to reform society, Israelite society. Okay? And then we hit this, in which you can almost say the prophets are no longer trying to reform Israelite society.
To encourage them to further sin?
I'm sorry?
To encourage them to further sin?
Not encourage them to further sin. I mean, I think it's almost like, it's almost they have a different function now. Their function is to document, to testify what God has done for his people and how his people has responded. So I'm going to be the one who says, this is wrong, and I'm going to write it all down, by the way. And God's going to crush you. Okay? And this, I'm going to be dead after a while. This document is going to be here as a testament to you about what you have done. It's beginning to, the writing prophets begin to function that way. If you look at Isaiah, if you look at Jeremiah, they never get anywhere. Okay, it just doesn't work. They never get anywhere. But the calling is to tear down Israel. See? This one is, so he says, here am I, send me. He volunteered, by the way, he volunteered without knowing what he's being called to do. You notice that? Who shall I send, who will I go for? He's like, me! Okay, go and do that. And then Isaiah said, wait a minute. For how long? Right? When are they going to turn around? Okay, and the God's answers, until the cities lie ruined and without inhabitant, until the houses are left deserted and the fields ruined and ravaged, until Yahweh has sent everyone far away and the land is utterly forsaken. And though a tenth remains in the land, it will be again be laid waste. If you have a tenth left, we're going to do it again. But as the terebinth and oaks leave stumps when they are cut down, so the holy seed will be the stump in the land. So at this passage, the prophets are really, we're kind of reaching a seminal, a turning point here, where prophets have a ministry of confusion, like you said, and it's really bearing testimony that God is calling people to repentance, and they're really demonstrating their wickedness. And then, as you know, when you write this stuff down, it outlives you. Right? A prophet who speaks and only speaks, when he starts writing things down, he's saying, look, this is going to be for further on. This is going to be for later on. It's for people who will come and ask the question, why are we here in Babylon? And the prophets will say, this is the testament to the failures of your forefathers. Okay.
It's kind of like another Noah episode then, right?
A what?
Another Noah episode.
Another Noah episode.
Right, so destroy the world and start over. Destroy Israel and start over.
Okay. Not, yeah, something like that. There's going to be so here you have a changing function of what the prophets are up to. They're knowing early on nothing's going to work. Jeremiah gets the same vocation, by the way. Hated it. Absolutely hated it.
It's depressing.
Depressing as heck. Your job is to bear testimony to the destruction of your country and their rebellion, so that people later on are going to go, okay, that's what happened. That's your calling. In fact, by your words and speech, you're going to confuse them further. But only illustrated their hard-heartedness. Okay, that's what's happening. That's the vocation, and it's an important vocation because in the ancient world, a God who cannot defend his temple or his nation is a kind of a weak God. A deity that's not able to fight properly is a kind of a lousy God. So They actually do. They take the idol. Like let's say in Babylon, I conquered this nation. I would go to their temple and take their idol, and move it to our temple, and move it down. So there's Marduk up there, and we have all the other idols from other places. So you guys are all part of the pantheon. We still worship you guys, but you're part of our pantheon now.
So
Okay.
that's why there were so many idols in the Jewish temple then, right? Because the kings just went around and took the gods would be protected.
Well, they were worshiping other ones in there, but what you do is you put it under yours, so you have this pantheon in your temple. You're like, oh, this is cool. So what's happening is, if you have this happening, if you have the prophets,
Yes.
what you're learning is this: Yahweh's temple wasn't destroyed because Yahweh couldn't defend it. Yahweh's temple was destroyed because Yahweh destroyed it. Okay. That's a very critical thing to know. And that's what prophets were doing. These writing prophets are doing, so they're really laying out a witness, a testimony, a recording of what God is up to. They're saying ahead of time, you're going to get destroyed. It is not because God can't handle your enemy. It's because God is your enemy. Okay. God is taking you down. So you'll know it. When this happens, you'll know it's me.
So doesn't the last verse give sort of
Hope?
a hope?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
Yes, it does.
Yeah.
And I would say in the prophets, you have these judgment oracles. The writing prophet that says, you're going to be judged. The day is coming. It's going to be ugly. Okay? For all of the stuff you're doing, for all your idolatry, and for all your social injustice, for all the way you fail the covenant, for the way you do not have hesed, you're going to be destroyed. Because you have completely failed in your mission. But second, there is salvation coming. There's a salvation oracle. There's something afterwards. After everything's burnt, there's going to be some kind of hope.
Wait, I don't understand why there's any hope in verse 13.
There's
Though
a
a tenth remains.
there's a
I'll still
holy
destroy it.
seed. There's a holy seed. There's a holy seed in the stump.
Well, it doesn't say that. It says the holy seed will be a stump. Which
Yeah.
is kind of like it'll be a cut down dead tree.
You keep going. The passage keep going. It'll talk about the sprouting forward, the root of Jesse.
Okay.
So it'll come up. What I'm saying is you have to keep reading beyond this passage. Today's talk is not on hope. So I didn't put that in there. I'm sorry. I cut the text off early. Okay. Today we're not offering much hope. But next time we're dealing with another sin, the sin of ethnocentrism. But and after that, the second to last one, we'll be talking about salvation oracles, the recalling people from exile and the hope of restoration, and that's a huge theme. But the theme is no longer let's fix this. It's more like this is hopeless, and there's going to be something afterwards that comes that's going to fix things, and that becomes now the dominant the storyline for the prophets. So.
Okay, so the prophets are one, testifying, but two, confusing the people. Like that's part of their role, right?
Well, how about that's the effect of their role? If they will speak the best they can. And they do. They speak pretty darn clearly. They speak
Okay.
powerfully, and people are like, no, we don't believe you.
So they're not making their ears dull, but
The effect.
I think that's the effect.
effect is
That's
that
the effect.
their ears become dull.
That becomes their ministry. Yeah, this is the result of their work.
And speaking about the poor, I heard him 1,000 times.
Yeah.
Well, how does it go away?
I mean, if you stand in front of people and start yelling, if you go to Wall Street and talk to people about the poor, that's what you're going to be doing.
And I know them.
That's what you're going to be doing. They're going to go, oh God, I'm one of these kind of people. I'm one of the Occupy Wall Street people. They're just going to ignore you, and their heart's going to be more and more calloused. Okay. Now, is it your fault? No, but you're bearing testimony. You're bearing witness to the callousness of certain types of people. And in Israel, this is the state they're in. They are calloused, and they're going to get worse. Their heart is hardened. They're going to get worse. We're not dealing with repentance anymore. We're dealing with judgment and a hope for afterwards. Yes.
So you're saying that the confusion isn't necessarily intent; it's the
It's a result.
result.
Yeah. I don't think.
So when he says, "Be ever hearing but never understanding, be ever seeing but never perceiving,"
Yeah.
it's kind of sarcastic.
Yeah, because he's attacking them. He's saying
Yeah.
the problem is the people. The problem is not the prophet who can't speak properly. You know, the prophet's like really bad at speaking. That's not the goal here.
Yeah.
Because that doesn't bear witness to the wickedness of the people.
Right.
What bears wickedness is an eloquent, clear speaker who's laying it out as clear as you can see it, and they go, huh? Right? They can't see it anymore. They can't visualize.
Yeah.
So the judgment is against the people. It's not against the prophet for being incomprehensible. Okay? And by the way, Jesus uses this line about his own ministry.
Yeah.
Which gospel?
Mark, I think they all do. Not John.
Not John.
Not John. Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Yeah, he will use this passage about his own ministry. But that's a different story for a different time. Questions or comments? I'm sorry that we're gonna keep hope off in the future for another not this session, but the next session, the one after that. But I think we'll have a fun one next time. We're gonna be talking. We will look at Jonah, we'll look at Ruth, and we'll look at Ezra and Nehemiah. Kind of how does the covenant deal with the goal, which is blessing the nations, right? In primary history, we didn't talk about that very much either. Okay, primary history is so focused on the people, the rebellion, and they're turning to other gods that we lost sight of the goal, which is make your nation to bless nations, and what that relationship will look like. So we'll talk about that, and then we'll come back to hope.
So, one question